How to articulate an idea using the power of storytelling. To understand this, we're going to break down the communication of the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. Now, when trying to explain an idea, we tend to bog people down with a lot of unnecessary details. We tend to ramble on, and we're not able to deliver a crisp narrative. So in this video, we're going to get into the easiest way to use storytelling to articulate an idea, a simple storytelling technique to reduce information and increase narratives, and how to build an idea by articulating a story even under pressure. By the way, if you're new here, hi, my name is Radeep from Frantically Speaking. We release communications content regularly, so if you're into that, hit subscribe. And if you want to take your communications learning to the next level, you can click the link in the description, check out our courses, and see if we can work together. And by the way, if you want us to break down an other celebrity or personality and make a communications video on them, comment that celebrity down below. If we get multiple comments of the same people, we might just make that video. So while watching these videos and interviews, I came across what I feel is one of the easiest ways to incorporate storytelling in everyday conversations. Because one of the problems that we face is that when we're asked to explain something, we tend to bog people down with a lot of information. Instead, we can do something else. And that is to lead with a self-example. A self-example is a great way to incorporate storytelling because it reduces a lot of pressure on our mind as well to make up a story, since it comes from our own experience. In this clip here, Asan was asked what his thoughts were on AI displacing jobs. And here's what he says.
If I look at even the simple workflow from when I joined Microsoft in 92 to now, if say somebody had to get prepped for, let's say, a customer visit, you would sort of go to the account team would write up a report, that report would show up in email, that'll get loaded into OneNote, and I would read it. And in fact, that was pretty much the sort of, I was preparing for most of my career those reports and then eventually, reading those reports. In the last even 5 months, thanks to these things like reasoning models like Researcher, it's completely inverted. I just go prompt myself, hey, I'm meeting with the CEO of XYZ Corporation, pull all the stuff I need to know. It pulls from the web, it pulls from my emails, my documents, most importantly, my CRM system, my supply chain system, because most of these folks are both customers and partners of ours, gives me one comprehensive report. And then I share it with the account team, right? So think about it, the workflow is inverted. So you could say, as a CEO, quote unquote, I'm doing more knowledge work than I was doing, quite frankly. I am more employable today because I feel more empowered. I feel that I can get to information faster, collaborate with my colleagues in the company. So I do feel the best thing that can happen is diffusion. In this phase, I think any knowledge worker, whether you're in software, whether you're in just horizontal knowledge work, in finance, in sales, or in science, use the tools, change the work. You have the agency to change your work artifacts, the workflow around you. And of course, I'm clear-eyed that there is going to be displacement. And so therefore, the best defense against that is skilling, reskilling. And it starts by using tools versus not using them.
So if you noticed, instead of giving a lot of different reasons and just talking about statistics and figures, he simply gave an example using himself, which in turn helped to answer the question. Now, whether you agree with the answer or not is a different story entirely, but here we're just talking about the communication technique utilized. The next time you're asked to explain something, try to use a self-example instead of providing information. For example, a lot of the times when I am asked about, hey, why should I really invest in communication learning? Instead of giving stats of how, people who are not good at communications tend to have lower salaries and get slower promotions, I just give my own example. I was a confused kid in college and I didn't know what career to go with. I realized that developing my communication skills is the one thing that no matter what I choose to do afterwards, it will serve me in that career. And that automatically helps people understand how ubiquitous of a skill this really is. So whenever you need to explain something, try to lead with a self-example. But what if you ask something a little more generic and you don't really need to lead with a self-example? One of the main things about storytelling is that we need to reduce information and increase the narrative. So here's a simple technique to help you do just that. Because we sometimes fail to realize that humans are less logical and a lot more emotion driven. So I'm first going to show you the question that Asan was asked and then follow it up with the response. So here's the question.
The first passions was cricket. And I think that molded not just your approach to the sport, but a little bit to teamwork and the like. Tell us where that came from.
Now, to respond to this, he uses something known as the anecdotal response. Now, if I was asked this question, I would simply have said, Cricket is a team sport, so you get to collaborate and you get to learn a lot of different sides of people. You get to learn a lot of aspects of leadership, because I played at different levels, so you have to adapt to different situations. So you need to know how to game different players at different levels to really succeed in the sport. But instead, here's how he responded.
Things that in particular that stands out for me is what leaders do to instill in people they lead confidence. In fact, I was having a very ordinary day in the field, and there was this guy who was my school captain, who then sort of changes me over and then takes a wicket and then gives me the ball back to bowl, and then I go on to have perhaps my best ever performance. And so I asked him afterwards as to why did you do that? And he looks at me and he says, because I need you for the season, not just for the match. I didn't want to break your confidence. And I'm thinking, God, this is a high school captain.
Interesting.
With that level of enlightened leadership skills. And so that's always stood out for me. And so there's lots of things that all of us who, grew up playing any sport, I think, learn in school that I think come back to us in different forms as we go on into our professional lives. But sport has been a major part of me growing up, and I still think about it.
And by using such an anecdotal response, we're able to really simplify the entire narrative. We're able to reduce all the information and replace it with a nice, simple story that is actually memorable. But what if you are put on the spot? How do you really build and articulate an idea even under pressure? Because in these moments, we tend to blank out, and we might not have somebody ask us a question. We might be on a stage, we might have to give a presentation. So in these moments, what do? I came across this amazing speech by SN, and I just want to play a small beginning portion of that speech.
My great-grandfather, who was a marginal farmer, had just passed away, leaving my great-grandmother a young widow with 2 sons and no source of income. To provide for her sons and their future, she had to move to a town nearby and make some difficult choices. She became a domestic servant, but still could only afford to send one of her sons to school.
The technique over here is very simple. It's to use a story hook. It simply means when you start to speak and you're explaining an idea, especially in public speaking, you want to start with the story itself. Here he talks about the story of his great-grandparents, and it eventually, if you hear the entire speech, it flows into the aspect of the importance of education, which is what the speech is eventually about. So if you find yourself in a moment where, hey, I have to talk in front of a large crowd and I'm not prepared, or I have to say something and I'm not really prepared, try to resort and begin with the story itself and then transition to your main idea. I found that when I was put on the spot in a more social setting, when I had to give a wedding speech for one of my friends, I was put on the spot. I hadn't prepared anything. I could not think of anything to say. I just started with a story because it put, as we discussed earlier in the video, less pressure on my mind, as your mind already has that memory. So I started with the story of my friend, and that eventually led to the values that he has, sprinkled in some jokes, and eventually that became nothing great, but it became a good enough wedding toast to give, especially if you're put on the spot. So those are 3 areas that you can actually start to utilize more storytelling. So if you need to articulate an idea, you can lead with a self-example. If you need to articulate a response, you can use the anecdotal response. And finally, if you're giving a speech or you're put under pressure and you don't know what to say, it's generally easier to start with a story hook. And in fact, if you want an entire blueprint of how you can speak without blanking out, we made an entire video on that right here. I'll see you in a second.